All right, welcome in everyone to this deep dive. We're going to be talking about something really fascinating today. It's not just about a piece of machinery, but it's really about the story behind it.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to be looking at Lucky, a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt that flew in World War II. And, we've got some really cool stuff here that gets into the personal story behind it all, not just the specs, but the human experience that's connected to it.
Yeah, and as you know, our listeners can always find out more about, the specs of the P-47. It's an impressive aircraft, and we've even got information about that on our website. But our mission in this deep dive is really to go beyond that and understand why Lucky was significant.
Right.
And we can do that by looking through the eyes of the pilot who flew her, the squadron he was a part of, and the group they belonged to. It's really about the human story behind this warbird.
Okay, so let's unpack that. And to really do that, we need to start with the man who flew her, Captain Charles Chuck Mohrle. Now, this Texan was hooked on aviation from a young age, and that passion, eventually led him to the U.S. Army Air Forces. From what we have here, he built a solid reputation in the European theater. What stands out to you about his early career?
Well, we know it's fascinating when you see the kind of pilot that Mohrle became. And the sources paint him as a tenacious and resourceful pilot. This wasn't someone just going through the motions. He was known for his leadership and ability to adapt under pressure. And, those are crucial skills when you're flying in combat over Western Europe in World War II. You just imagine how important that was in those skies.
And it's here where things get really interesting. Mohrle developed a strong personal connection with his P-47.
Yeah.
After a few close shaves, those times where things could have gone very wrong, he started to see this aircraft as something more. He considered it his lucky charm.
Wow.
So can you elaborate on how these close calls might have shaped his thinking?
Sure. If we think about the bigger picture here, the pilots faced incredible dangers every day. It's understandable how surviving those repeated brushes with death might lead someone to look for something more than just skill or chance. I mean, we're talking surviving anti-aircraft fire, flying and landing with significant damage. It's understandable why someone would feel their survival was due to something special about their aircraft.
Right.
Makes you wonder, have you ever had a similar experience? Like maybe there's an object that you felt connected to after it helped you through a difficult situation. It's a powerful feeling.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So it sounds like Lucky wasn't just a random name. It had real meaning that came from Mohrle's experiences.
Definitely.
Now, Lucky was part of the 362nd Fighter Squadron, which was part of the 357th Fighter Group. So tell us a bit about these units and what they did during the war.
Okay, so when you look at the way the U.S. Army Air Forces was structured, you have the 357th Fighter Group, which was nicknamed the Yoxford Boys, was a really well-respected unit. Initially, they flew P-47 Thunderbolts, but later they transitioned to P-51 Mustangs for those longer-range escort missions. What's important here is to understand that these groups were on the front lines of the air war.
Right.
And during their time with the P-47s, they played a huge part in protecting Allied bombers. They also carried out those vital ground attack missions across Europe.
Yeah, and within that group, you had the 362nd Fighter Squadron, and that's the one that Lucky flew with. And they really made a name for themselves.
They did.
So what contributed to their reputation?
The sources we have really highlight the 362nd's contributions. They were considered a really effective unit operating in the European theater. Pilots like Captain Mohrle were leading the charge. The squadron became known for their aggressive tactics and their commitment to protecting those Allied bombers. And, this really speaks to how important teamwork was and that shared purpose. I'm sure that resonated with everyone involved.
Yeah, it sounds like a tight-knit group. So Lucky became a real symbol for this squadron. It wasn't just any other plane. It represented something more to the men who flew and maintained it.
Absolutely. Lucky became a symbol of the 362nd Fighter Squadron's resilience, their determination. It was an inspiration, not just for the pilots, but also for the ground crews working to keep these aircraft flying. They were working under incredibly difficult conditions.
Yeah.
It makes you think, how can a single object represent the spirit of an entire group? It's quite powerful when you think about it.
So let's talk about that name Lucky again. It wasn't just a whim.
No.
There were specific instances that fueled Mohrle's belief in his aircraft. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of situations he survived?
Yeah, so the sources mentioned that Captain Mohrle survived numerous dangerous situations in combat. Close calls with anti-aircraft fire, managing to fly and land after his engine was damaged. And I think you can understand how those experiences would lead a pilot to feel that their survival was, at least in part, because of luck. Or maybe that something was watching over them. Imagine yourself in that cockpit facing those odds and how strong that feeling of having a lucky aircraft could be.
Yeah, it's almost like the aircraft became a character in his story.
Exactly.
And it seems that this feeling of luck extended beyond just Mohrle. Even the plane's artwork reflected its name. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, what's really interesting here is that this belief was made visual. It wasn't just decorative.
Okay.
So the nose art had a four-leaf clover, a classic symbol of luck, and right next to it was the name Lucky in big bold letters. It was a statement, and it really reinforced that feeling. It became a point of pride for the whole squadron, embodying their fighting spirit, and their hope for survival. Really shows you the power of symbols.
So this wasn't just about one pilot or one plane. It was about a shared experience, a shared sense of hope in the face of danger. The story of Lucky really highlights that human side of this huge global conflict.
I agree. It's about the courage, the determination of all the people who flew and maintained these aircraft. The P-47 was so important in so many missions, from protecting bombers to ground attacks, and the effectiveness of the aircraft really came down to the teamwork and dedication of the squadron.
And it's important to point out that Captain Moore's service didn't end there.
Right.
He completed his tour and was recognized for his bravery. What did he do after Lucky?
Yeah, the sources say that Captain Moore served with distinction and received commendations for his service. His story, along with Lucky, really shows the sacrifices that were made and the acts of heroism that were so common during World War II. Really makes you appreciate their dedication to duty.
So we're wrapping up this deep dive into Lucky.
Yeah.
And it's clear that this aircraft was more than just a powerful fighter. It became a symbol.
I think that's a great way to put it. Lucky embodies the resilience of the Allied forces and the human element behind their efforts. It's a story about camaraderie, the bravery of Captain Mohrle, and that hope. That hope that even in war, a bit of luck, or maybe we should say skill and determination, can make all the difference.
It makes you think, It makes you think how these seemingly inanimate objects can take on such profound meaning, especially during times of hardship. Lucky wasn't just metal and rivets, it was survival, hope, that bond between a pilot and his machine.
And one final thought for their listeners: while we've been focused on Lucky, remember there's so much more information out there. You can find details about the P-47's design and how it worked, and you can also explore the stories of other iconic aircraft from this era, like the P-40 and the P-51. Each one has its own unique story to tell about the air war. So I encourage you to think about how the technical side of these machines comes together with the human side, the stories of the people who flew and maintained them. Maybe think about objects in your own life that have a deeper, more personal meaning.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Lucky. We'll see you next time.
Sounds good.